And without any further delay, it is my pleasure to welcome our first speaker. He is the former Attorney General and no stranger to the convention, having spoken here several times. It's the Right Honourable Dominic Grieve QC, kicking us off this evening, talking about threats to our rule of law, and no doubt with the laser precision we all know him to be famous for. So please welcome Dominic to the stage.
Thank you for the welcome. Thank you for inviting me to come and participate in this evening's convention. And it is undoubtedly going to be touching on some very important topics which go to the heart of maintaining our democracy in future. How indeed do we maintain our democratic processes in the face of the development of social media and the arrival of dark money as a potential influencer over democratic outcomes? And during the course of this evening, you're going to hear from a number of experts on this subject in due course. Not tonight, I'm afraid, but I hope in the not too distant future. The committee of which I am chair, the Intelligence and Security Committee, will produce a report on Russia, which includes references, and I hope we'll be able to get some of it published, to Russia's cyber activities and activities on the internet, of which you will all be aware, certainly in the context of the US presidential election, was undoubtedly active both in hacking and disseminating information to try to influence the outcome, and also in trying to influence the outcome by means of bots. But rather than go down that road to detail which I can't share with you this evening in any event, I thought that the better course of action to start us off was simply to have a brief reflection on the nature of democracy and the wider threats which I think it is experiencing at the moment. When I go to address a sixth form, or traditionally something I go and do quite often as a member of Parliament, and I suppose I've honed my skills down over the last 22 years about what I have to say, and if the topic is, could you come and talk about the democratic processes in our country, I always start by explaining that my view has long been that the purpose of parliamentary democracy is not for majorities to impose their decisions on minorities, but for a process of debate to take place which enables minorities to accept majority decisions. There are plenty of places around the world where one can see that whatever democracy in terms of majority decisions may be, the system has broken down and led to strife, civil war, murder and mayhem, because ultimately the legitimacy of those decisions is not accepted by others. And it always seems to me that it's a message we need to fundamentally keep in mind when we consider how democracy works. On the whole in this country, I think we've taken it for granted. It was Churchill who famously, coming into power after the period of the Attlee government and asked, what is it you're going to change, replied, well, first of all, we've got to allow the policies which the Attlee government have enacted to work themselves through and see what needs to be done. It was an acknowledgement that violent change or sudden change never fits easily with democratic parliamentary democracy. And yet, of course, what we are seeing today is increasing pressure with binary issues being brought before the electorate and binary solutions being put forward. Now, democracy is not for snowflakes. As I know, as the recipient of death threats, but leaving those to one side, hideous imprecations and vile abuse, you have to accept that in a robust democracy, people are going to say things, firstly, which you vehemently disagree with, and similarly, people will express themselves in terms which you might yourself not wish to employ, but which probably falls perfectly properly within the canon of the acceptable to the person who's doing it. Somebody was shouting "traitor" to me as I walked down Whitehall only yesterday afternoon. But that's a very different thing from bringing into being a process of democracy where the binary nature of it causes endless confrontation. And of course, with the benefit of hindsight, and I rather regret that some of us didn't speak out more clearly at the time when the 2016 referendum was being created and crafted through Parliament, its hideous reality was that it posed a binary question to the electorate, and on top of that, a binary question with at least one answer was entirely abstract, so that you could interpret in the word leave virtually anything you liked. And the consequence of it, as we have watched subsequently, has been to contaminate our political discourse. Because whereas the truth is that democracy is ever talking, it is a process by which we moderate each other's opinion by dialogue and influence each other, and you can't stop it, and you can't stop somebody having an opinion on one day and changing it on the other. The viciousness of what we have now created is that there are now tablets of stone which have been put up and to which everybody is supposed to defer as being definitive conclusions that cannot ever be questioned. That simply isn't compatible with working parliamentary democracy, nor with evolutionary change, and it's bound to put it under immense stress. And we can see that in the way in which the Brexit debate has unfolded. The attack on the judiciary over the Miller case for carrying out a perfectly sensible and lawful interpretation of what our constitutional requirements were for triggering Article 50, and yet denounced on the basis that in some way it offended the will of the people, whereas actually it provided clarity to a process where previously none had existed. And we can see it now as the debate has developed in the way in which our politics are polarizing, something which I view with great alarm, because ultimately, if politics become excessively polarized and people stop listening to each other, it doesn't matter who has majority or minority views, it will be incompatible with the survival of a free and democratic country. Now, to all that, we also have the challenges of modernity. I think it's quite important that we shouldn't exaggerate those too much. After all, dark money in politics has been around for a very long time. I served not so long ago on the Political Parties Elections and Referendum Act, which came in, as I seem to recall, around the year 2000. This was effectively the first time that there had been any proper opportunity to regulate the system of political donations. And yet, prior to that, I don't think anybody in the 1960s and 70s would have been saying that we didn't have a parliamentary democracy. But there's very little doubt that globalization now provides endless opportunities for people to seek to influence other people's politics. And when that's linked to the growth of a social media and internet, which allows for the rapid dissemination of information, and on which I regret to say people do seem to me to pay vastly excessive reliance in the belief that there are statements of truth contained in it. And on top of that you have the added problem that people can do this under the cloak of anonymity, and we know, and there is absolutely no doubt about this, that the system is being exploited by nation states and indeed organizations or individuals to magnify, amplify, or denigrate others in an artificial way by giving the impression that something is exciting great public interest when it isn't, or indeed seeking to challenge something by means of thousands of interventions which have in fact been generated by machine, then I think we do have, certainly in the educational field, quite a major challenge. And that, I think, is what this evening is correctly going to concentrate on. Just to give an example, somebody contacted me today saying, some of you may rather regret this, saying that Guido Fawkes had been explaining today that Heidi Allen had been encouraging me to leave the Conservative Party. Now, as it happens, I hadn't spoken to Heidi for about 6 weeks, although I did speak to her this afternoon. But it is entirely fake news. And the difference is that whereas if it had been published in a national newspaper, I would probably have written to the editor and just registered a complaint on the basis that there was no foundation for this story whatsoever. The fact it appears on Guido Fawkes means that I simply shrug my shoulders and ignore it. But I can guarantee that at some point in the course of the next week, various people will assure me that they believe this to be the truth. So politicians are laboring under immense difficulties now, both in trying to get messages across and also in trying to get truth across, and are finding it increasingly difficult for people to distinguish truth and falsehood, and this undoubtedly can be ruthlessly exploited by those who are unscrupulous. These then are the challenges we face, but we can't magic them away. We have to live with them. We have to try to introduce some mechanisms of control. I certainly think there are powerful arguments that anonymity on the internet is without justification at all, and that there is a right to know from whence comes those who wish to communicate on it. And we need, insofar as we can achieve it, to try to lower the temperature of our discourse and to remember that ultimately politeness, including to those with whom we may vehemently disagree, is the absolute foundation of communication. It is, after all, the process by which human beings have moved from being cavemen to the society we enjoy today. We didn't do it by banging each other over the head with cudgels. We did it by talking to each other. And it must be absolutely essential that our ability to do that for the future is maintained, and that people should have confidence that what they're hearing is indeed the expression of view of the person from whom they're getting it. I think if we keep those ideas in mind, then we will probably start moving in the right direction. And I hope very much that during the course of this evening, you will have an opportunity, as I will, insofar as I'm going to be able to stay, because I may have to disappear off at some stage to go back to the Commons, that we will all have an opportunity to drill down a little bit into what is a very important topic. And I'm immensely grateful to Henry Porter, as usual, and the convention for bringing us all together to do just that. Thank you very much.